kind of like my grandson, you know. The moment I saw him, I was like, okay, I'm done. You know, you're just lost. And with Martha, because Brad and I, so she called us. I looked on my calendar. I went and saw her September 20th. And then you and I went over on the 23rd. And because she had bought a house, and she was so mad at the contractor's brand new house we built. And it was like, I still have them, 4 pages. I brought them, I showed them to people. Look, 4 pages of stuff she wanted us to do. And she was just full of vinegar, man. She was just full of, she was a pistol. But we got along really good. But she was, but it was interesting because, and you know who else does this to me? Those of you that know Yuta Barrett. It took Yuta about 5 years with me for her to figure me out. Every time she would come here to Grace, she'd see me on a ladder, or she'd see me and Brad doing something. She would ream me out. It's Yuta. She would go, "What are you doing? How come you're doing that? You should be pastor. You should be the pastor." And finally, about the 30, you know, it's the widow of the sacred pastor. I had to say, you know, you're like. Finally, I said, "I am pastor, and knock it off," because it's kind of cool what you're doing when you're serving people and you're doing it with someone, and good things happen. And she saw that, and something clicked for her. Because I came by and mowed her lawn, which is about as big as this table. You had one of those lawns, you know, like in a condo?
That's kind of
Yeah, that kind. Oh, actually, it's probably this big. And she was just so blown away, and then something just absolutely changed. Because this is a gal, I'm saying this in the sermon yesterday, and I had to preach from a pulpit. Can you believe that? I about fell out of it. I said, because she said, well, the first time so Brad and I are going through, and she'd say to me, "How come you tell all those stories?" In the sermons and stuff. "How come you do that, jokes and stories?" I said, "Well, you got to take that up with Jesus, because he does it all the time." And then 10 minutes later, she goes, "How come you use that screen?" "I don't like the screen." And I said, "Ask our oldest members what they think of it. Because our oldest members love it." When I first did the screen, I was terrified. I thought all our old traditional members would hate it. And they're like hugging me and kissing me. Because it's like, it's big! And I don't have to juggle a hymnal and a bulletin and something that falls out of it. So they were so happy. So I said we did that because we love our oldest members. And then she, about 10 minutes later, she goes, "How come you don't preach from a pulpit?" And I go,
There is it.
"Oh no, this is what she said." Yeah, I know, I did tell her that.
Turn on your
And that's how it was
microphone.
when I came. So she goes, "How come you don't preach from a pulpit?" This is what she said. "It's like a cabaret up there." That's what she is. It's like a cabaret. Everyone in the church cracked up. Because they knew her well. She had been a member there like 5 or 6 years, sang the choir and stuff. And it was just really interesting because that was, and then as we kind of worked with her and served her and just cared about her, it just kind of clicked, and all of a sudden she kind of got. Yeah, this is what I tell pastors all the time. The people you serve, I tell this to young people, they gotta know that you actually love them. You're not just, it's not cliches and platitudes. You gotta actually love people. And you can't pick and choose. You can't go, "Well, I like those people, I don't like that one." You know, I mean, it's just what it is. And so you pray for grace in that. Because we were human, we're all human, right? So you gotta, if you know, so when people call, we say yes. I mean, we just, when people call, we don't give excuses. I don't know. And the other one I tell them is make the Bible make sense. You'll be okay. So if you love them, make the Bible make sense. Life is good. So it was a fascinating funeral because her father was the pastor of the largest, now you'll laugh at this, Hungarian Reformed church in America. Now that sounds like not a big deal, but in LA it was a big deal. And it was a church of a couple thousand members and very traditional. And so they did a song in Hungarian yesterday, a beautiful song. That has to be an impossible language to learn. I'm listening to it, and it's worse than German, which all you do is spit. German and Hebrew is a bunch of spitting. But Hungarian is spitting plus glottal stops and weird things. Anyway, it was a delight, so it was good to be with them.
Can you turn your microphone on?
No, I don't have a mic. I mean, not that'll work in here.
Oh.
Yeah. I have this mic. I can talk louder though. You want me to talk louder? Okay, I'll do that. Everyone got their page? Here we go, we're on page 11. We are, oh, and then this one I hope we get to this today, doing this one. Ooh, I wanted to tell you, this is the good thing about travel. So I almost missed the flight last night, that was funny. So I told Tim Zickratch, you need to do this stuff in the church, and Aaron, you need to preach a message, that's the thing, so, okay. So, because we don't cancel church. What was I saying? God, what's spasm?
Traveling.
Oh yeah, what's good about traveling? So I read my first book on history of Israel. So I've got 3. I didn't read that monster one yet. That's going to take me a while. There's no way I can read it all before I teach the class. But I'm going to use that Kaiser one as a good, because it's the one that really goes through the biblical history. But I read this one, and it was really nicely done, very readable. And it's a gal who is current. She was born in Tel Aviv, and she is not a right-winger. She's a progressive, and longs for a 2-state solution, longs for Palestine, longs for this. But it poses very significant questions about how come Jews are hated across the world. How is that? Why is that? And so forth and so on. So it really was a good read. It gave me a new perspective.
Did she say why?
Well, her answer's not mine. Mine is a spiritual thing. I mean, I think it's a spiritual thing. Her thing is that people get mad when one group succeeds and the other doesn't. People get mad. And you can't say, people don't have it within themselves to say, we didn't work hard, or we made a bad choice, or we did a stupid thing. The human animal, at least in our culture today, can't say that. I have to have I was abused. I have to be a victim in some way. The only reason that this group is not performing at this group is because I help I'm being oppressed.
But there's other groups that are successful.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I'm not saying only. I'm not saying only, but what happens is when you see that disparity, and it's not to say that, but I mean, goodness gracious, the Jews have the biggest card to play of all. Throughout every location, throughout every generation, they were hated, executed, including ghettos, pogroms, and every level. I mean, take slavery in America, for example. The slaves that were imported from Africa had their own life and stuff. It was other tribes that enslaved them, sold them to the white guys, and then enslaved them in a horrible way in other places, Jamaica, Central America, North America. It's horrible. But it's different because they were not always oppressed, and so forth. They made their own way. So anyway, it's, in my mind, a lot of it is, so she analyzes it in kind of socio-economic, cultural, and demographic terms. It's interesting. Because for me, somewhere a red flag has to go off to say, why is this people of all peoples, in every setting, throughout every generation, not just sort of oppressed, but I mean, people trying to kill them all, like all the time. Something is goofy there. To me, that is being a spiritual. A moral compass is desperately gone. So, because I mean, here's the fact on the ground. In Israel, what was Judea and then Galilee, and that Rome renamed Palestine in 135 AD, in that area, after Rome left and there was this diaspora, the Ottoman Turks came. And people don't know this too. Turks are different than Arabs. You call a Turk an Arab, he'll kill you. Seriously. You call a Kurd a Persian, he'll kill you. I mean, we think it's all of them. It is not. There are like 40 tribes in Afghanistan. I mean, here's the funny thing. Pakistan is an absolute parallel to Israel. Founded almost exactly the same year. Pakistan in 1949, Israel in 1948. Pakistan is founded as a sanctuary for Muslims. they were part of India, and the Punjabis were killing them all. It was religious wars. So they carved out a nation and made Pakistan. Do you know this? How come we don't know this? It's exactly the same. It's because it was creating a homeland so that Jews who had been persecuted and oppressed throughout the ages could have a homeland and return to their ancestral lands and roots. But nobody protests Pakistan. Free Pakistan! You know, I mean, nobody says that.
But they're at war with India all the time.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, you never hear about that. So it's weird. So you go, why is there a double standard? Why is it this way? And the crazy thing is, the Jews, because when the Jews started buying land in the Ottoman Empire, really fascinating, they'd come in dribs and drabs. Can we buy this 3 acres? Can we buy that 40 acres? Can we buy some water rights? Can we do just bits and bits and bits and bits? And the place was like, I mean, it was a wasteland. I mean, in the 1800s, you should read Mark Twain's account of when he visits the Holy Land. He is just appalled. It is like a wasteland. He visits Jerusalem, and they're living in dirt and dog poop, and they're on the dole from the government. Everybody's on the dole. You got little tiny groups of Jewish scholars that are huddled, just studying Torah. And here come these Zionists. Here come these Sabras. You know, these people that want to make, and they're being oppressed, and they come to, and they don't know how to farm. You think these people were farmers? Jews in Germany? Do you think they were farmers? No, all they could do was money lend. And they were limited to certain jobs they could do and so forth, you know, that kind of stuff. So when they come, they absolutely transform the land. I mean, if, for example, you can take this in our own, I listened to Voddie Baucham. I don't know if you know Voddie Baucham. He came to faith as an adult, and he's a black guy who leads in Zambia. He grew up with a single mom who was Buddhist. And it's funny, he has a German last name, Voddie Baucham. And he's the head of a Christian organization in Zambia. And in fact, I mean, he's very bold-faced about it. He says, the only hope of the world is the church. Is the Christian church. It's the only hope of the world. And we keep shooting ourselves in the foot. Or we're timid, or whatever. But his comment was, he said, my community does not realize that if 75% of your children are born out of wedlock, and if, you know, over half of your people, you know, don't graduate from high school, you're going to have a problem. I mean, that's what he says. He says, we've got to fix that problem. Not reparations and not this and that. And it's not trying to be racist or anything, but Jews don't do that. The Jews came in there and said, in fact, we don't want any of your stinking help. Please leave us alone and let us do our thing. And no one will leave them alone. That's the thing. No one will leave them alone. So, I mean, you know, they formed a nation. The Arab nations around said, hey, evacuate, and when we kill them all, we'll give you their stuff too when we move back in 1948. Well, the Jews miraculously win. In 1969, Six-Day War, they're attacked again. Wham! By all their neighbors. And they end up conquering the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights and half of Lebanon, all the West Bank. And they give it all back in the hopes that they might have peace with their neighbors. You get to the year 2000, Ehud Barak. So all along, the only people who have rejected a two-state peace agreement have been the Palestinians, not the Jews. The Jews keep offering, here's this, here's this, here's this, here's this. And then it's Israel that gets condemned by the UN. You look at the stats on that sometime, too. Israel has been condemned by the UN as like 50 times as much as any other country on earth. Like North Korea. Israel is condemned, you know. Iran, sponsors of terrorism. Yeah, it's just fun. So in the end, it's a spiritual thing to me, in the end.
I read an interesting thing from somebody in Hollywood who was Jewish, and he said all of us who denounced God, he said it doesn't matter because they hate us just as much.
Oh, the Jewish guy who said,
Yeah,
they
he said
became
there's a whole
secular.
group of us that don't believe in God, but he said we're just as hated as everybody else. We thought that would save us.
Yeah. Yep.
And didn't save them.
Yep. So there's something spiritual about it. But anyway, it's kind of an amazing story. And our prayer really needs to be that there are peace-loving leaders who get put into positions of authority in all of the nations around. I'm not super optimistic about that. Because, you know, in the era we live in, the loudest voices seem to gain the greatest traction. Here's the most scary thing to me. Now, how do we know if these polls are right? Because, you know, let's say you interview Palestinians, you say, so do you approve of Hamas or not? Well, how do they know that if they say, no, I don't approve, they're not going to get killed in their sleep? So they say yes. But the data, at least those polls, are seeing this huge percentage, 75%, that are in support of Hamas. So so again, we don't know exactly how that is, but you sure see a lot of cheering in the streets for when Jews are killed. And you don't see any cheering in the streets of Israel when Palestinians die. So something is awry. Some moral compass is tilted. So it's a fascinating thing because I want to explore the spiritual dimension of it. Because we have to there have to be people that says we love peace. And I think about this, in radical Islam, not mainstream Islam, but in radical Islam, it is a tremendous reward to martyr yourself in fighting the infidel. You get this great reward in heaven, you know, Vestal Virgins and the whole bit. And so if you live in that culture that says, killing these nameless, faceless people over here gets me this reward in heaven. So it's awkward. And we, Westerners, we made this huge mistake after 9/11. We said, well, we'll go into Iraq and we'll make them a democracy. Or Afghanistan, we'll make them a democracy. We don't share the same cultural values, we just don't. What you gotta do is keep people safe. And sometimes that means taking the ability for weapons away from people. You know, let's say you have a messed up kid who's got a whole bunch of guns laying around the house. I don't know, what would you do? I'm finding a way to take away those guns from that kid who's messed up before he kills a whole bunch of people. I don't know, I think that makes sense to us, but it doesn't seem to make sense to the UN. Or, sorry, now I'm getting weird. All right, page 11. So, to that end, again, here you are in this horrific, the Jews are hated by the Romans, hate them, and Jesus hated by the Jews. Middle of the page. Therefore, because it was preparation day, that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day. Remember, this is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, so this is a great big festival for them, in which the Passover was part of it. So all male Jews who, in good standing, who could come to Jerusalem, made that journey. Passover lambs were selected, they were sacrificed, made available for Passover meals. That was all this whole week. It's a 7-day festival, okay? So this is part of that. It's a high holy feast. The Jews asked Pilate, and of course, this makes tremendous spiritual impact, doesn't it? I mean, Christ the Passover lamb, right? That's the connection that we have here. Christ the Passover, saving us from the angel of death. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first, and the other was crucified with him. Now that's interesting. So they wanted to take the bodies down before, because the other criminals might have lasted many days, several days. They could keep them alive, you know, and it's a testimony to people, we're the big bad Romans, don't mess with us. That's the whole idea of public executions like that. And in fact, if you don't know this, in America, that was like the most popular event ever, were public executions. Thousands of people would come to watch a hanging or an execution. Isn't that crazy? That's a weird comment on the human animal, seems to me. Anyway, I just saw a post on the last public execution. It was Texas. Like 10,000 people at it. So they broke their legs, and you know why, right? Hasten their death, because that's how you stayed alive. You pushed up, took a breath. Because as you slumped, the physical nature of it is your lungs would fill with fluid, that your abdominal cavity would fill with fluid, so you kind of drown. That's kind of a weird way to say it. You suffocate. It's asphyxiation, is how you die. If you don't die from anaphylactic shock or loss of blood or things like that, you die from that, asphyxiation, your cavity fills. So the way to prevent that is push up, take as many breaths as you can before the pain causes you to slump back down, and then your cavity fills up. So it could take days, was the thing. And we've looked at this in Psalm 22 and in Isaiah 53. We see that description of crucifixion like that. It describes that, yeah.
I was just thinking, a modern person in modern society would last maybe a few hours. But the walking they did in those days, the strength they already had in their legs and everything, their own health basically caused them to suffer longer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, whenever Jesus is portrayed as kind of a weenie, you know, he's just kind of, just a scholar, just kind of an academic. This guy, I bet he was wiry and tough. He's a stonemason. That was a carpenter was in those era, in that era. Much more. You know, when we think of a carpenter, we think of framing a house or building furniture and stuff like that. And he may have done some of that. Tecton is the word for Joseph's profession, and Jesus learned it. So, but it mostly meant stonemason. That was what they had to work with. So they would cut stone and lay it. That was, but they were tough guys. I mean, shake hands with a stonemason today, or with Brad, my friend the carpenter. His fingers don't go straight. So they did that to hasten their death. When they came to Jesus, they saw he was already dead. Why is this significant? Do you remember?
Bones had been broken.
Bones unbroken. That's one prophecy. Is another one. No one takes my life from me. Right? I lay down my life for the sheep. You know, I lay it down. It's in the gospel lesson today. Gospel reading today. So, but one of the soldiers pierced the side with a spear. Immediately blood and water came out. And that, I have a doctor's thing on this which illustrates how that is an indicator of death, of actual death. Once again, and I mentioned this in the sermon today too, you know, Paul says it in the epistle reading we have today, but indeed Christ has been risen from the dead, which means Christ indeed was dead. I mean, this is really an interesting thing that Islam's major argument about Jesus is that he never died. And their argument is very much like Jews and Gentiles both, in which they find the crucifixion an offense. They find it an offense. Instead of the glory of God, they see it as an offense. God can't die like that. God can't die. God can't die like that. Both things. So they're just horribly offended by that. And it is only faith that looks at the cross and sees the glory of God. It really is. And Jesus says it repeatedly, that's where the glory is. Paul reinforces that over and over. I came among you and preached only Christ and him crucified. That's all I preached. I mean, that's interesting that he doesn't even say Christ crucified and he rose from the dead. I mean, he does in chapter 15, clearly. But he comes and he says, yeah, I was a one-note Charlie. The crucified Christ. That's the glory of God. He paid for our sins, you know, was victorious over death. So anyway, Jesus lays down his life. It's not taken from him. And then and he who has seen has testified. So this is John, right? Because he was at the foot of the cross. This is eyewitness. You remember that? John is there with Mary, Jesus' mother, and then there's about 4 other Marys. Seems like Salome is there too, James and John's mother. And his testimony is true. He knows he's telling the truth, so that you may believe. That's the point. I'm saying this to you not to defend my honor. I'm saying it not to prove a point. I want you to believe in who he claimed to be. And that's the whole purpose of John. These things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and that by believing in him you would have life in his name. That's the whole theme of the Gospel of John. So not everything is in there. It's really kind of one of John's points. I don't have everything in there, but the stuff I have in there is so that you would believe he's your Savior. For these things were done that the Scripture should be fulfilled. Not one of his bones shall be broken. There you go. And again, another Scripture says, they shall look on him who they pierced. After this, when evening had come, because it was the preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath, there came a rich, prominent council member, right, so it's Friday, from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, named Joseph, who had himself also become a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for fear of the Jews, a good and just man who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, he had not consented to their decision indeed, right? So this tells you he's what? What group is he a part of? Pharisees, correct. But even more specifically, it's a subset of Pharisees who were the leaders. We call it the Sanhedrin. So it was the Sanhedrin that convened and condemned Jesus to death, and it says here he was one of them but did not agree to the decision, which probably means he abstained. You know what I mean? Probably. When we were over in Oberammergau, it's really interesting. It's just so we were there for the Passion. It's kind of an all-day experience. They do it every 10 years, this little town. So we took a group over to Germany and saw it. It was very cool. It's all in German, and it was cold. But it was very moving. And it's done on this huge stage. The town is all involved. You have to be a resident of that village to be part of it. Anyway, it's very cool. But the script that they wrote, and it's an old script, comes from the 19th century, makes Joseph and of Arimathea and Nicodemus the primary protagonists against those who would want to kill Jesus. It's a really interesting take. So they add a lot of words. They have a lot of, here's Nicodemus and Joseph kind of arguing with Caiaphas and Annas and stuff like that. And we don't see that in the scriptures. He doesn't have anybody defending him. What he has is momentary acts of secret kindness is kind of what you see. Brief little moments of courage in there. But I wanted to show you this because see that little passage here? Right in the lower, where it starts with after this when evening had come. You really, in this, look at this, you get all of the Gospels together, and it gives you the fullest picture of Joseph of Arimathea that we have in Scripture. And you don't get that if you just read just the Luke account or just the John account. Look at it again. There came a rich, right, so we learn that he's wealthy, prominent council member from Arimathea, which was a city of the Jews, named Joseph, who himself had also become a follower of Jesus. When it says disciple, it doesn't mean one of the 12 or anything like that. Follower. But secretly, for fear of the Jews, a good and just man who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, waiting for the coming of the Messiah, he had not consented to their decision indeed. This man, coming and taking courage, went into Pilate and asked that he might take away the body of Jesus. Now why did he ask? It's right on the edge of Sabbath. Right on the edge of Sabbath. So they needed to get that dead body. This is Middle Eastern, very Middle Eastern, Jewish and Muslim both. You got to get that body wrapped in the ground, like now. It's like, I forget what the timing is, within 24 hours or something like that. If someone dies, you have to do that. So he comes in asking, hey, we're an hour from Sabbath, sundown, because Sabbath starts at sundown. Think about it, it's like the end of March, 1st of April, it's right in that time frame. So it's near the equator, so sundown probably at 6, let's just say, something like that. When you visit parts of the world that's near the equator, you get 12 hours and 12 hours, right? So it's kind of interesting. So he's got a little bit of time there. Jesus dies at 3, and Joseph wants to safely get him into the tomb. Pilate marveled that he was already dead, right? So he's Roman. He knows how long this takes. Take days and days and days. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if he had been dead for some time. So when he found out from the centurion, he granted the body to Jesus. To Joseph, sorry. So he came and took the body of Jesus, and Nicodemus, boy, it's interesting, he had to have help. You'd have to guess that Pilate told the soldiers and the centurion to take it down, right? And the way it probably was done, this is the best information that we know, it absolutely could have been very traditional, where the cross is on the ground with the transept cross, and Jesus is nailed, fixed to the cross on the ground, and then it's leaned up and dropped into the hole. Think how hard that would be. But probably, most of the archaeological evidence we have is Jesus carried that cross piece. They had the posts probably up at Golgotha. There, they probably had a stack of them, you know, for however many they were executing. But then they just kept at the, you know, at the praetorium, at the judgment site, those transept piece. Do you know what I mean by that? Just the piece. So Jesus probably would have been lashed to that and carried it, and then affixed to the larger post. Or the posts were in the ground and Jesus was hauled up onto that. But I kind of think it was probably on the ground because he puts up at that title, this is the King of the Jews. So anyway, there were a number of things that we found from archaeology. I mean, once again, we know this happened. We just know it happened. There's 7 sources outside of the Bible which talk about the execution of Jesus. Roman sources and Greek sources that tell us this. They knew, and they were experts at it. And Nicodemus, so here comes Nicodemus joining Joseph, who at first came to Jesus by night. So this is John writing, isn't it? Isn't that John, the blue? Yeah. So he's remembering chapter 3, tying it back to that. Also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. That's a lot, isn't it? 100 pounds. That would probably be 2 5-gallon buckets completely full. Right, 2 big 5-gallon buckets completely full. Then they took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. So it's interesting, because it appears the women didn't know this, did they?
Yeah,
Because they come. Now, there may have been additional things that they wanted to do to honor the body, but they probably didn't realize. They may not have known any of this. We don't have a record of that. Then they took the body of Jesus, bound in strips, as the custom of Jews is to bury. Now, the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb that was hewn out of the rock, in which no one had yet been laid. And he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. So there they laid Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby, and the Sabbath drew near. So this is convenient as much as anything. This is Joseph's tomb. I'm intrigued. I don't know where that reference is, but it tells us exactly that it's his tomb. But and actually in Isaiah 53 it says that very specifically. He was laid in a tomb of a rich man's tomb. It's very interesting, isn't it? Oddly specific. Again, 700 years before the crucifixion. But in Isaiah 53 it talks about lying in a rich man's tomb. This was Jesus' fate. Well, the 2 other guys, you can be sure, just got dumped in the dump, rolled down the hill into the dump. They certainly were not wrapped, nothing, just thrown off the side of a hill. It's Gehenna is the area. In all ancient towns, so they're all built on a tell. They're all on a hill because it's harder to attack. And you've also built on the ruins of the previous one. So in the Middle East, everyone's an archaeologist. You just dig down and you'll find something from the 1920s. You dig down a little farther, you got something from the Ottoman Empire and so forth. So they build a little town, wham, it gets destroyed by an invading army, rebuild it on that spot because it was a good spot, right? And as that goes, it gets to become a tell, a little hill, and that's so if you ever go to the Holy Land, any little hill almost certainly is a place where there was a town or a village or a city. So that's what happens here, where he's laid. And so on the side of the hill was the dump. You just rolled it down the hill. So you always positioned the dump. Like, where would we position our dump in Pocatello if we were smart? We would position it just a little north of Northgate. Right? Isn't that prevailing wind? Comes through the gap? Am I wrong? Lifelong Pocatellans? Instead, we have ours in the south. So all the comes right in through town. But I mean, that's what you typically did, was put it where the prevailing winds would take us. So the tanners were all on that side of the city. But that was horrible, gross smelling stuff. That's what happened to the body. So Jesus, that's not his fate. He's wrapped, he's prepared, he's honored by those who follow him. not the 12, but Joseph and Nicodemus and then the women on Sunday morning are those who show courage. And he even notes here, the gospel writer, who himself was a coward, says that he took courage. He could have written in there in parentheses, unlike us. And he went to Pilate directly. Okay, next page 12. And the women who had come with him from Galilee, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, sitting opposite the tomb, observed the tomb and where his body was laid. Oh, so they probably did know that. I apologize, now that I see this together. They knew something, that Jesus at least,
We wouldn't have been able to finish
yeah,
because of Sabbath, right? So they would
probably not completely.
Yeah, it's a multiple day,
Not
and
complete.
to sit, they had to sit Shabbat,
Yeah, Shiva.
Shiva.
Interesting. No, this is good. I mean, it's interesting. So we don't, it doesn't say they observed him putting it in, that they saw the tomb, and they saw where it was laid. And then we know, anyway, we know some more things there. I'm just looking here. Oh yeah, no, okay, good. Good. So they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, so this is Sabbath, on Saturday, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, "Sir, we remember while he was still alive how that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day." And this is helpful too. On the third day, that's really the common phrase. That's the common phrase. Until the third day. So even the Pharisees, religious leaders, understood that they was on the third day. So make sure you've got someone there guarding that, otherwise, look at what they say, "Lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.' So the last deception will be worse than the first." I mean, this makes sense in the sense of, if you have a cultic following, passionate followers, that they might try to perpetuate a hoax. What's so great about our scriptures is the guys writing it are the very ones who are being insulted all the time. Aren't they? These are the guys who run away and deny and argue amongst themselves, and yet they're the ones writing here and saying, "Yep, this is how it happened." Yeah.
And yet at the same time, the Pharisees, who are trying to make sure that nobody can say he rose from the dead, are providing the alibi that proves the body was not stolen.
Okay, we follow. Forgive me. We
Well,
follow.
the Pharisees want to make sure that they can't steal the body,
Right.
so they put a guard there, and that proves
Oh,
to
yes.
ages to come that nobody stole the body.
Yes, excellent. So you have both the Pharisees who requested it and Pilate who executed it. And so he posts a guard, right? So Pilate said to them, "You have a guard, go your way, make it as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. So you have the steel on the stone, right? So if it's disturbed, you know that somebody has messed with it, and then setting the guard. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James, Salome brought spices, that they might come and anoint him. When's the Sabbath past? Yeah, I don't know why he has that line there. It should be in the next little section he has here. So the next section, "Behold, there was a great earthquake Sunday before sunrise." So, and actually that should follow, I mean, they're just waiting for the sunrise. That's when Sabbath is over. When is it over? They have a term.
Sunset.
No, they have a term. When you can see the star, when you can see the star, yeah, sunset to sunset, when you can see the second star. It's something like that in the Talmud. That's the rabbinic instruction. Is then it was dark enough, or it was that Sabbath was over. You had to see I think it's the second star you can see, and then it's Sabbath is over. So it would be from sunset. So they're preparing that evening. So that should be included with that next sentence. You're right, Lauren. And so there before sunrise, a great earthquake, an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, his clothing white as snow, and the guard shook for fear of him and became like dead men. All right, now we get to Easter. So,
That means that the witnesses to the angel were actually the guards.
for sure.
Pastor?
For sure, but we have witnesses to angel too. Sorry, one second, no, we're good, Brad, hang on a second. Because they come and see, and some accounts have one, some accounts have two, but in all cases, they're messengers. And that's the thing that people get goofed up to go, well, they just said it was a guy. Well, angel has a very definite definition. Angel means messenger. Angelos is just a Greek word for messenger. And so angels were messengers, but it didn't matter. And so people get it goofed up. So there were messengers sent with the message of Christ's resurrection. Go ahead, Brad, sorry.
I was just gonna say, you know, I did a lot of thinking about this because I read a little more while, during the week, and I was thinking that the stone didn't need to be moved away for Jesus to raise from the dead. It was more of a thing for people to understand. I mean, he didn't come out of that tomb because that angel rolled that stone back.
You know what? I will agree with you. I will agree with you because the resurrected Christ is not bound by the laws of physics. So he passes through the door where the disciples are. He just appears. But God chooses to do it to make a point.
Yes. I think it was something that, I mean, just the way it all comes down, they had to do
Yeah.
that for people to acknowledge it.
Well, so the guards are witnesses. And here's the interesting thing, right? We have all of this. The problem is that this thing, oh, his disciples stole the body, or, you know, he didn't really rise from the dead, or this or that. None of that has lasted. I mean, people have said that today, all forever. People have said it. It's foolish. And it does not persist. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny. You cannot argue that the disciples stole the body, and you can't argue that the Pharisees had the body. Because if they had the body, they'd have trotted it out. Right? Hey, look, dead guy. You know, but instead, we have the witness of guards, we have the witness of the women, we have the witness then ultimately of the disciples. 500 eyewitnesses to the resurrection of Christ. So, but it begins with confusion and anxiety and uncertainty. So that's where we're starting. I gotta stop and go back to what I'm doing. So we'll start there with the accounts of the early Sunday morning on Easter, on that one. We'll start there. And then, so I didn't quite get to this. We'll get to it. This one. We'll get to it. Let's say the blessing. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. Amen. Yes, sir.
How's biz?
It's busy.